When my parents vanished in the towering peaks of the Northern Territory, my younger brother and I were summoned to the legal office to hear the reading of their final wishes. It was there that our family's lawyer announced my brother would inherit a magnificent, glass-fronted penthouse in the heart of Sydney, valued at over $1.2 million, along with a portfolio of stocks, bonds, and various investment accounts. As for me, my inheritance was a rundown, solitary stone cottage situated in the middle of a windswept, barren outback. That very evening, my fiancée, her eyes cold as ice, threw her engagement ring onto the coffee table and left to pursue my brother, of all people. I felt as if the entire world had turned its back on me. But when I pushed open the heavy, rusted iron gate of that old cottage, I was astounded. Concealed within was a secret scroll that led to a trove of rare gemstone deposits valued at more than $500 million. I decided to keep it a secret, remembering the words of my father, a seasoned bushman who once taught me, "Wealth means nothing if it comes at the expense of the earth." But during a moment of taunting from my brother and ex-fiancée, I made a slip. A single sentence escaped my lips, and the secret shattered like a dropped wine glass. From that moment on, my brother and I were locked in a bitter struggle over the inheritance, never realizing that the ones orchestrating it all were our own parents. Hello, my name is Jasper Thorne. I was born in the remote plains of the Northern Territory, where the scorching sun was a relentless companion that never departed. Our small stone cottage stood at the edge of the arid bush, where gnarled gum trees stood like silent watchers, guarding the secrets of the land and sky. The house was tiny, just a single room that served as both living area and kitchen, a bedroom for my parents, and a cramped loft where I curled up in blankets each night, listening to the wind howl through the cracks in the stone walls. In the winter, the dust storms would blanket the roof, and I often woke up with parched lips despite burrowing deep into a pile of worn blankets. My father, Roderick Thorne, was a third-generation bushman. He was tall and lean with eyes sharp as a hawk's and black hair tied neatly at the nape of his neck. He used to be a hired guide, leading tourist groups deep into the untamed wilderness. Later, he worked at a quarry, then a mining exploration company. The work was demanding, but he never complained. To him, hard work was a way to prove one's worth to this land. "The land is our mother," he'd say in his deep, steady voice, solid as rock. "You must respect it, for it sustains us, but it can also swallow us whole if we betray it." My mother, Eleanor, was the opposite. A gentle woman with rich auburn hair and a smile as warm as the rare rain in the outback. She was of European descent and worked part-time as a librarian. She loved me. I knew it from the way she stroked my hair every night or slipped a warm piece of damper bread from the oven into my hand. But she also always supported my father's strictness. "Your father wants what's best for you," she'd say whenever I grumbled about being sent out to gather firewood in the blistering heat. Our family was poor, not the kind of poverty that left us starving or in tattered clothes, but the kind that forced us to weigh every dollar carefully before spending it. I remember days following my father into the bush, carrying a tiny axe on my shoulder, chopping dry branches for firewood. Sometimes I waded into the river, the water so cold it felt like my feet were turning to stone, just to catch a few fish for dinner. Once I even secretly salvaged scrap metal from a dump near town, selling it for a few dollars so my mother could buy extra sugar or flour. Back then, I didn't think of it as hardship. It was just how we lived, how Mother Earth forced us to live. My father taught me everything about survival. By age 4, I could start a fire with just a flint and a few dry twigs. By 6, I could build a sturdy makeshift shelter in the bush, strong enough to withstand a dust storm. By 8, I could track a kangaroo through the woods, though I was never strong enough to hunt one on my own. My father didn't just teach me skills. He taught me a way of thinking. "Never take more than the land allows," he said when we fished. "Take only what you need to live and leave the rest for tomorrow." My childhood was shaped by those harsh days when the heat of the outback seeped into every breath. I didn't have fancy toys or know the luxury of extravagant trips. Instead, my childhood was the boundless bush, the icy river, and nights huddled by the fire, listening to my father tell stories of our ancestors, the spirits of the wind, and the mysteries of the earth. Those years forged me into a boy who grew up fast, quiet, and reserved. At school, the other kids called me Bush Boy because of my father's worn-out jacket, my calloused hands used to wielding an axe, and my refusal to join in their noisy games. I didn't care. I knew I was different. While other kids dreamed of cars and color TVs, I dreamed of journeys deep into the outback where it was just me and the whispers of the land and sky. Harsh as it was, that childhood gave me a quiet pride and an unyielding will, enough to face any challenge that nature or life could throw at me. But I never imagined that the greatest challenge would come not from the biting heat of the Northern Territory or the long nights deep in the bush. It came from my own family, from my younger brother, Marcus, and from the changes that sudden wealth brought to our once humble home. When I was 9, everything in our lives changed overnight, as if Mother Earth had suddenly smiled upon us. My father, Roderick, who was used to toiling at the quarry, caught the attention of a large diamond exploration company. They needed someone who knew every hill and every stream in this land, and my father, with his razor-sharp eyes and a memory for terrain like a living map, was the perfect choice. The new job brought a salary we could only have dreamed of before, enough to pay off debts, enough for my mother to stop counting every dollar when buying groceries. For the first time in our lives, our family escaped the shadow of poverty. We left the plains, leaving behind the old stone cottage where I used to huddle in the loft, and moved to a new house in Darwin, the largest city in the Northern Territory. Our new home had a proper fireplace, clear glass windows, and no gaps for the wind to sneak through. After moving to Darwin, my mother quit her part-time library job to open a small bakery. The bakery, located at a bustling street corner, had a wooden sign carved with Eleanor's Delights, and the mouth-watering aroma of freshly baked bread wafting through the neighborhood. Customers flocked in, from locals to long-haul truck drivers. My mother smiled more, her eyes lighting up every time she saw the cash register brimming. That same year, Marcus was born. My younger brother, a boy with rich auburn hair like our mother's and big, sparkling eyes like a summer lake, Marcus came into the world at a time when our family no longer worried about food or clothing. He grew up in a warm house with a room full of toys I never dared dream of at his age. I remember pushing Marcus's pram around the neighborhood, watching him giggle as our mother handed him a brand-new toy kangaroo. I wasn't jealous. Truly, Marcus was my little brother, and I loved him. I liked being the big brother, teaching him how to tie his shoes or showing him how to read the clouds to predict rain. But as Marcus grew, I began to notice differences. Not just between us as brothers, but between the worlds we were raised in. I grew up in blistering heat and days of chopping firewood until my hands went numb. In the harsh lessons my father taught me about survival, I absorbed his teachings about preserving nature. The way he looked at me as if he were entrusting me with the legacy of our ancestors. And Marcus, he never knew the heat of a night without firewood. He never waded into a river to catch fish. He never heard our father's stories about Mother Earth. Our parents, busy with their new jobs, didn't have time to teach Marcus the lessons they had ingrained in me. Instead, they compensated with material things. Marcus had new shoes every season, a shiny bicycle, even a small TV in his room for cartoons. Whenever Marcus wanted something, our mother would smile and nod. And our father, though still stern, couldn't bring himself to say no. He's still young. Let him enjoy himself, my mother would say when I asked why Marcus didn't have to do chores like I did at his age. Marcus didn't just grow up in abundance. He grew up believing everything in life came easily. At school, he was the center of attention with his expensive clothes and a confident way of talking as if the world revolved around him. The kids didn't call Marcus Bush Boy. They called him the Prince of Darwin. And Marcus loved it. He loved the praise, loved showing off his new watch or shiny shoes. Sometimes when I looked at him, he felt like a stranger. I didn't blame our parents. They only wanted to give Marcus what I never had. But I slowly realized that their indulgence had planted a dangerous seed in my brother's heart. Marcus didn't value what he had. He took everything for granted. Money, clothes, even our parents' love. Once I saw him toss aside a brand new shirt because it had a small tear. "Mom will buy me another," he said, shrugging as if it were only natural. I looked at him wanting to say something but stayed silent. I remembered how our father taught me to mend clothes with a needle and thread, how he told me a man must cherish what he has, no matter how small. The differences between us became more pronounced as I entered my teenage years. I still woke up early to help our father fix fences or clear the driveway of debris. Marcus slept until noon, then ran off with his friends laughing loudly. I still loved trips into the bush where I could hear the whisper of the wind and feel Mother Earth beneath my feet. Marcus loved the city lights, the noisy pubs, the parties where he could show off. I lived by our father's ways: discipline, patience, and respect for nature. Marcus lived as if the world existed only to serve him. Once I tried talking to him. "Marcus," I began as we sat in the kitchen while our mother baked in the oven, "have you ever thought about learning to fish or set up a camp like Dad taught me?" Marcus looked at me and smirked. "Why bother with that stuff, bro? Mom and Dad have money now. We don't need to live like bush people anymore." I didn't respond. His words cut like a knife. Not because they hurt me, but because I realized Marcus didn't understand, and perhaps never would. In those years, I began to feel an invisible distance growing between me and Marcus. I still loved him, still saw him as my little brother, but I couldn't ignore that we were walking different paths. I was a man of the bush, of Mother Earth, of the harsh but honest lessons. Marcus was a man of the city lights, of opulence, of things that came too easily. I thought that despite our differences, we were still family, that we could still hold hands through those years. But then, Celeste entered my life, and with her I learned that love could be a flame that warms the heart, but also a storm that burns away every shred of trust. I met Celeste one summer afternoon in Darwin when the rare rain melted the ice on the streets. I was in my mother's bakery helping her clean tables after the lunch rush. The smell of freshly baked bread and coffee lingered in the air, mingling with the chatter and laughter of a few regular customers. I looked up and saw her, Celeste, with her gently curled copper hair, eyes as blue as a glacial lake, and a smile that seemed to light up the entire room. She wore a thin wool sweater, held a book in her hand, and walked into the bakery as if she'd always belonged there. "A flat white and a slice of fruit loaf, please," she said, her voice soft but confident as if she knew exactly what she wanted. I wasn't the type to be easily smitten. Life in the outback had taught me to keep my heart guarded like I kept a fire alive on freezing nights. But there was something about Celeste that I couldn't look away from. Maybe it was the way she sat reading her book, quiet but fully absorbed as if the world had shrunk to the pages in front of her. Maybe it was the way she smiled at my mother, calling her Aunt Eleanor with natural warmth. Or maybe it was simply that she felt different from the girls I'd met who only cared about parties or new dresses. I mustered all my courage to strike up a conversation. "Good book?" I asked, wiping a table but keeping my eyes on her. Celeste looked up, slightly surprised, then smiled. "Pretty good," she replied, holding up the book, a collection of poems by Banjo Patterson. "Do you like poetry?" I shook my head, a bit embarrassed. I'm not much for poetry, but I love the bush and the things he writes about. The wind, the smell of earth, the shadows of trees. Those are things I see every day. She looked at me, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "A bush guy, huh?" She teased, her tone playful but kind. I laughed, feeling lighter for the first time that day. You could say that. From then on, we started talking. Celeste was the daughter of a middle-class family in Darwin. Not overly wealthy, but comfortable enough for her to grow up with things I never had. Summer vacations in Queensland, piano lessons, beautiful dresses. But she didn't brag. She spoke of her dream to become a journalist, to travel the world and write about forgotten people and places. "I want to tell the stories of people like you," she said once as we sat by the river, watching the water shimmer under the sunset. People who live true to themselves, not chasing false glamour. I was drawn to Celeste, not just because she was beautiful, but because she seemed to understand me. She didn't laugh when I talked about chopping firewood in the bush, about how my father taught me to start a fire or track a kangaroo. She listened, her eyes lighting up as if she were living in my stories. When I spoke of Mother Earth, of the lessons my father passed down, She took my hand gently but firmly. "You're different, Jasper," she said. "You're not like those guys who only brag about cars or money. You have strength." Her words made my heart race as if for the first time someone saw the real me. We fell in love. Those days felt like my life had been lit up. I took Celeste into the bush, showed her how to pitch a tent, how to spot animal tracks. She laughed loudly when she tried to start a fire for the first time and sent smoke billowing everywhere. I taught her to listen to the wind, to feel the pulse of Mother Earth. In return, she taught me to open up, to talk about things I'd always kept hidden. I told her about my harsh childhood, about nights by the fire, listening to my father's stories, about the quiet pride of surviving the outback's heat. She hugged me, whispering, "You're stronger than anyone I've ever met." But as our love deepened, I began to notice changes in Celeste. She grew more ambitious, craving more than what Darwin could offer. She dreamed of big cities, prestigious newsrooms, luxurious apartments in Sydney or Melbourne. At first, I thought her ambition was a strength, a fire like my own resilience. But slowly I saw her start to compare. And painfully, the person she compared me to was Marcus. Marcus, now in his 20s, was the epitome of what Darwin called success. He drove a sleek sports car, wore tailored suits with glittering watches on his wrist, and lived in a high-rise apartment our parents had bought him, a place with a balcony overlooking the harbor where he threw extravagant parties. His friends were the elite, young businessmen with confident smiles, beautiful women in elegant outfits, and conversations filled with laughter and clinking glasses. For Marcus, life was a stage, and he always wanted to be the star. Celeste began to see me differently. She used to call me different, but gradually her gaze would drift away when I spoke of the bush, of Mother Earth, or the values my father had instilled in me. She started looking at Marcus, my pampered younger brother, with an admiration she'd never shown me. She was drawn to his opulence. One ordinary afternoon, as we walked along Darwin's coastal road, I saw Marcus standing by his car, laughing loudly with a group of friends. Celeste stopped, looked at him, then turned to me. "You see your brother?" she said, her voice tinged with an admiration I didn't want to hear. "He knows how to live. He knows how to make people notice." Her words were like a small, sharp knife. Not enough to draw blood immediately, but enough to sting. I tried to keep my voice steady as I did when facing the cold desert winds. "Marcus has always been like that," I replied. "He has his way of living. I have mine." But Celeste didn't stop there. In the days that followed, she said things that pierced my heart. "Why do you live so small, Jasper?" she asked once as we sat in my mother's bakery, her eyes looking at me like I was a puzzle she couldn't solve. "You don't know how to enjoy life. You don't show off. Don't you see Marcus? He lives big, lives truly." I stayed silent, my hand tightening around my coffee mug, but I didn't speak. I just looked at her, seeing her eyes grow distant as if I were no longer the man she loved. Celeste began to criticize me, not with blunt words, but with subtle remarks and disappointed sighs. "You lack ambition," she said once as we sat by the river. "You could do so much more. Why don't you want to be like Marcus, with money, status, everything that makes people respect you?" I wanted to shout that I didn't need anyone's respect, that I didn't want to be Marcus, that my worth wasn't in cars or high-rise apartments, but I only stared at the water, feeling a block of ice slowly pressing down on my heart. To Celeste, living big meant having wealth to flaunt, spending lavishly and commanding attention in society. She wanted the spotlight, to stand beside a man who made the world turn and look. And I, with my old jacket, my rough hands from wielding an axe, my dreams of the bush and Mother Earth, couldn't give her that. I began to feel the cracks forming, and those cracks grew wider each day. Deep down, I knew they couldn't be mended. Celeste wasn't just comparing me to Marcus. She was being drawn into his world, a world of lights and glamour. She no longer saw me as a man of strength, but as someone lacking ambition, someone living small. While my brother lived large, I tried to hold on to her, tried to remind myself that our love was worth fighting for. But I never expected that before I could even try to salvage that love, a greater storm would crash into my life, sweeping away everything I once thought was certain. My parents vanished, leaving behind a void colder than any winter I'd ever endured in the outback. I was 30 years old when the devastating news arrived. It was an early winter morning with dust lightly settling on the streets of Darwin, blanketing rooftops and sidewalks in a thin layer. I was at my mother's bakery helping her clean up after a busy morning rush. The phone rang and a stranger's voice came through, dry and emotionless. "Are you Jasper Thorne? I'm an officer with the Sydney Police. I'm very sorry to inform you that your parents, Roderick and Eleanor Thorne, have gone missing after a helicopter crash." The world seemed to stop. I stood there, still holding the rag I'd been using to wipe tables. But all the sounds around me, the chatter of customers, the clanging of pots and pans in the kitchen, faded into a blur. The officer continued, his voice steady like he was reading a report. "The small helicopter carrying your parents encountered trouble while flying over the vast outback near the Queensland border. Some wreckage has been found scattered across the barren plains, but there's no sign of bodies or survivors. We're continuing the search," he added, but his tone carried no hope. "We'll contact you if we have more information." I hung up, feeling as if an icy weight was crushing my chest. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because I didn't know what to do with the pain. It was too vast, too cold, too real. I called Marcus right after. He was at a pub. I could hear loud music and laughter in the background. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice distracted as if I were telling some unimportant story. When I repeated the news, he went quiet for a moment, then said, "Yeah, okay. You handle it. I'm busy." He hung up, leaving me with the cold beep of the disconnected line. The days that followed were a foggy nightmare. Local media began covering the crash. "Northern Territory couple missing in helicopter crash," screamed the sensational headlines in Darwin newspapers. People in the community, those who'd eaten my mother's bread or been guided through the bush by my father, came to the bakery to express their condolences. They hugged me, offered words of comfort, but I felt only emptiness. Celeste stayed by my side, at least at first. She held my hand, whispering that she'd always be there, that we'd get through this together. But her eyes were distant, no longer warm like they used to be. While I drowned in grief, Marcus acted strangely. He showed up at the bakery a few days later, dressed impeccably as always, in a new leather jacket and polished shoes. "How's it going, bro?" he asked, his voice light but insincere. I looked at him and saw a stranger, someone seemingly untouched by the pain I was carrying. "Aren't you sad?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Marcus shrugged, flashing an enigmatic smile. "Sure, I'm sad, but life goes on, you know. Mom and Dad would want that." I didn't respond. I couldn't fathom how he could be so calm. But then I overheard him talking to a friend on the phone right there in the bakery, his voice brimming with excitement. Yeah, the will's probably going to be read soon. Hopefully, there's something worthwhile, right?" I stood there, my hand gripping the edge of the table, feeling a cold wind blow through my heart. Marcus wasn't just calm. He was thinking about the inheritance, about what our parents might have left behind, while I still couldn't accept that they were gone. A few weeks later, the court declared my parents deceased based on the helicopter wreckage and the absence of any signs of survivors. Death certificates were issued, cold and official, like a final punctuation mark on all hope. I didn't want to believe it, couldn't believe it. But the papers in front of me with their red seals and judge's signature left no room for denial. The Darwin community began to express their grief. They brought to our house loaves of bread, kangaroo stew, and carefully woven wreaths of golden wildflowers. The next day, a small memorial was held by the river where my father used to fish. People lit candles in the cold Northern Territory wind, sharing memories. How my father had helped them repair vehicles, how my mother baked bread to share with the neighborhood every winter. I stood listening silently, realizing that my parents didn't just belong to me. They were part of this community. But when the last candle flickered out and everyone left, I was alone again with a void nothing could fill. Celeste stayed with me during those days, but her presence only deepened my pain. She tried to comfort me, but her words sounded rehearsed. "Jasper, you have to be strong," she said, but her eyes looked elsewhere as if her mind was on something else. And I I kept going to the bakery, wiping tables, answering customers' questions about my parents. But my mind was elsewhere, lost in the bush I used to roam with my father. I dreamed of my parents every night, my father standing by the river, teaching me to fish, my mother in the kitchen smiling at me through the steam of baking bread. But every morning, I woke to the cold truth. They were gone, and I didn't know how to keep living. And then, on a gloomy afternoon when the Darwin sky was heavy with clouds as if it too carried my sorrow, the phone rang. A polite but cold voice came through. "Jasper Thorne, this is Barnaby White, your family's lawyer. I need you and your brother Marcus to come to my office tomorrow morning for the reading of your parents' will." I stood there gripping the phone, feeling a chill sweep through me. I called Marcus. "The will," he said, his voice brimming with excitement that made me shudder. "Great, bro. Finally, something worth looking forward to. See you tomorrow." He hung up, leaving me with a gnawing sense of unease. The next morning, I arrived at Barnaby White's office, a small but elegant building in downtown Darwin with glass walls and a polished brass sign. Marcus showed up late, striding in, wearing a sleek black suit, his hair perfectly styled and a confident smile as if he already knew what was coming. "Hey, bro," he said, clapping me on the shoulder like we were close friends, not brothers facing a moment that could change our lives. The lawyer's meeting room was small but stifling, with a long wooden table and leather-upholstered chairs. Barnaby White, a middle-aged man with silver hair and gold-rimmed glasses, sat at the head of the table, a thick stack of documents in front of him. He looked at us, his expression stern but neutral. "Jasper, Marcus," he began, his voice steady like a proclamation. "Today we will read the will of Roderick Thorne and Eleanor Thorne. I offer my condolences for your loss, but, as per your parents' wishes, I will now read what they have left behind." I sat there, my heart pounding, not because I expected anything, but because I felt like I was reopening a wound that hadn't healed. Marcus, on the other hand, sat upright, his eyes gleaming as if the lawyer were about to hand him a golden key. Barnaby opened the file, flipped a few pages, and began reading. His first words hit the room like a cold gust of wind. "To our youngest son, Marcus Thorne, we leave the glass-fronted penthouse in Sydney, valued at over $1.2 million, along with a portfolio of stocks, bonds, and various investment accounts." The room seemed to hold its breath. Marcus let out a small triumphant laugh, unable to hide his satisfaction. Barnaby continued, his voice still calm, "To our eldest son, Jasper Thorne, we leave the stone cottage in the remote plains near the Northern Territory, where our family lived in our youth." He paused, looking at me as if expecting a reaction. I said nothing. I couldn't say anything. The cottage, the place where I'd huddled in the loft, where my father taught me to start a fire, where my mother sang me lullabies on blistering nights. It was now just a dilapidated legacy, something no one wanted, something no one cared about. I felt as if my parents had disowned me, as if all my efforts, my discipline, the lessons I'd learned from them were meaningless. Marcus looked at me, his smile now wider, dripping with smugness. "Well, bro," he said, his tone mocking, "that cottage is perfect for you. Bush guy, right?" I didn't respond, only feeling betrayed, not just by Marcus, but by our parents, the people I thought understood me better than anyone. That evening, I returned to my small apartment, carrying a heavy pain. Celeste was waiting for me sitting on the sofa, but her eyes no longer held the warmth they once did. "So how'd it go?" she asked, her voice cold as if she'd already guessed the outcome. I recounted everything, each word like a knife I drove into my own heart. When I mentioned the cottage, she laughed. Not a joyful laugh, but a bitter, almost scornful one. "A rotting stone cottage?" she said, standing up, hands on her hips. "That's all you got? Jasper, are you serious? Marcus gets $1 million penthouse and you get a pile of broken rocks?" I tried to explain, tried to say I didn't care about money, but Celeste wouldn't listen. She paced the room, her voice rising. "Don't you see? Marcus knows how to live, how to win, and you cling to that small life, holding on to your bush, your Mother Earth nonsense. But where has it gotten you? A crumbling cottage?" She stopped, staring straight at me. her eyes flashing with disappointment. "You're a loser, Jasper. You'll never measure up to your brother." Her words were like a blizzard sweeping away the last of my hope. I stood there silent, watching as Celeste slammed the engagement ring on the table. The ring I'd saved up for a year to buy. "I can't live like this," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "I need a man who lives big, who does something with his life, not someone who just holds an axe and dreams of the bush." She turned and walked out of the apartment, leaving me with the sound of the door slamming shut. Just a few days after our fight, Celeste went public with her new relationship with Marcus. My younger brother, with his $1 million penthouse and triumphant smile, had become the man she chose. I sat in my empty apartment, clutching the ring she'd left behind, feeling as if everything I'd believed in, love, family, loyalty, had melted away like sand under the sun. I'd lost my parents. I'd lost Celeste. And now I felt like I'd lost myself. In the days after Celeste left, I lived like someone trapped in a blizzard, unable to see the path ahead, hearing nothing but the howling wind in my mind. I avoided Marcus, avoided my mother's bakery, which had once been my only solace. Every street corner in Darwin now felt like a reminder of betrayal. Celeste's smile as she stood beside Marcus. His triumphant look when he learned he'd inherited the $1 million penthouse. I couldn't stay in this city any longer. Couldn't face the pitying glances of neighbors or the whispers behind my back. I needed a place to breathe, a place to rediscover myself. I decided to head to the stone cottage in the Northern Territory. The legacy my parents left me. Though in everyone else's eyes, it was just a pile of rotting wood. The journey to the plains was long and hot, like a trip back to my childhood. I drove my father's old beat-up utility vehicle through sun-scorched, dusty roads, flanked by endless stretches of arid bush. Every gum tree, every red hill stirred memories. "The land is our mother," my father used to say, his voice as steady as rock. "You have to listen to respect it, and the land will answer." I wondered if Mother Earth was answering me now or merely punishing me. The cottage came into view as I turned onto a rough dirt road. It was smaller than I remembered, its roof sagging. The stone walls were grayed by years of sun and dust. The windows were caked with dirt. Some stones had crumbled and the chimney looked like it could collapse at any moment. I pushed the door open and the hinges screeched like a lament. Inside, the air was hot and dry, smelling of dry earth mixed with dust. Faint light filtered through the windows, illuminating the cracked wooden floor. I saw the loft where I used to sleep, the fireplace my mother once tended, the small table where my father had carved my name into a piece of wood. Everything was as it had been, but now it felt empty, like a house without a soul. I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, letting the pain wash over me. I thought about the will, about how my parents chose Marcus over me, about how Celeste chose him over me. I started cleaning the cottage. I swept away dust, cleared broken bits of stone, and wiped down the fireplace. While trying to fix a loose floorboard, I noticed it made a strange hollow sound, as if there was a void beneath it. Curiosity got the better of me, and I used my father's knife to pry the board up. A small wooden compartment appeared, hidden deep under the floor, like a secret kept for years. Inside was an old metal box, rusted at the edges, but still sturdy. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a carefully folded scroll, its paper yellowed but still legible. The lines were drawn in black ink accompanied by symbols in a native Bushman language, characters my father had taught me when I was young. I spread the scroll out on the floor, the faint light from the window illuminating the winding lines that led deep into the bush. Some areas were marked with a small star, symbolizing a gemstone deposit. Others had a black droplet, indicating oil, and layered lines represented valuable timber forests. In the corner of the scroll, in my father's handwriting, was a note. "True value lies not in what you take, but in what you keep." I read it over and over, and for a moment it was as if I could hear his voice in my ear. I leaned closer, tracing each line, my heart pounding as I began to grasp the meaning. The marked lands, if the notes were accurate, held resources worth hundreds of millions of dollars, a treasure beyond anything I'd ever dared to dream of. I sat silently in the rotting cottage, clutching the scroll, feeling as though my entire life hung in the balance. Part of me screamed to run outside, to shout to the world that I wasn't a failure, not the bush fool Celeste had mocked, that I held a fortune that could make me richer than Marcus, richer than anyone. But another part, the part my father had patiently shaped, whispered a reminder. Not everything that can be taken should be taken. The land is our mother, and she must be preserved, not stripped bare. My heart began to tear itself apart. I didn't yet know what to do with the scroll, so I decided to bring it back to my apartment in Darwin, hiding it in a locked drawer. Every night I took the scroll out and stared at it as if it could tell me what I should do. I imagined selling the information about those lands, getting revenge on Marcus by proving I was wealthier than him. I pictured Celeste coming back, her eyes sparkling when she saw I was no longer the small-time man. But then I remembered my father, who taught me that Mother Earth is sacred, that taking too much is a betrayal. I remembered my mother, who once said, "Happiness lies not in money but in how we live." I decided to keep the secret, to neither exploit nor sell it. I wanted to honor my parents' legacy, even if it meant I remained just Jasper Thorne, the man of the bush, nothing more. But Mother Earth, as my father once said, always has ways of testing us. A month after my parents' disappearance, I decided to hold a small gathering to honor them. The people who raised me and Marcus, who left me with lessons that could never fade. I wanted a quiet space where family and friends could share memories of my parents, where I could feel them again, even if only through stories and smiles. I chose my mother's bakery as the venue because it was where she poured her heart, where the smell of fresh-baked bread and coffee still lingered like a piece of her soul. I stood in the bakery, arranging chairs in a circle, placing a photo of my parents on the table. My father with his stern smile, my mother with her gentle eyes. Familiar faces arrived gradually, bringing flowers and condolences. Aunt Clara, my mother's cousin, hugged me tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. Old Ben, who used to guide with my father, patted my shoulder with quiet sympathy. I stayed silent, forcing a smile, but inside I felt only emptiness. Marcus arrived late as usual. He walked in, Celeste at his side. Seeing her, my heart felt like it was being crushed. She held Marcus's hand, smiling lightly as he whispered something in her ear. I turned away, focusing on arranging coffee cups for the guests, but that image clung to me like salt rubbed into a wound. The memorial began. People took turns sharing memories of my parents. Aunt Clara spoke of the time my mother taught her to bake bread, her voice choking with emotion. Ben recounted guiding trips with my father, laughing loudly as he recalled how my father teased him for being terrible at fishing. I spoke too, though my voice trembled. I talked about nights by the fire, listening to my father speak of Mother Earth, how he taught me that true value lies not in money, but in integrity. But when it was Marcus's turn, he stood briefly, saying only a few words. Mom and Dad were amazing people. They worked hard to give us a better life. I'll always be grateful. He sat down and Celeste clapped, her eyes full of pride. I looked at him, searching for a hint of sincerity in his voice, but found only shallowness. He spoke as if reading a prepared speech, not from the heart. I wanted to stand up, to scream in his face that our parents deserved to be remembered with love, not empty platitudes. But I held back, clenching my fists under the table, trying to stay calm. After the sharing, people began to chat and eat, and the atmosphere grew lighter. I stood in a corner of the room, watching everyone, trying to blend in but feeling out of place. Then Marcus and Celeste approached, each holding a glass of wine. "Well, big brother," Marcus said, his tone mocking, "this memorial is not half bad, but you know Mom and Dad would probably be prouder if you did something bigger than this little bakery." Celeste giggled, her eyes sliding over me, cold and distant. "Yeah," she added, her voice sweet but sharp as a knife. Their words ignited a fire inside me. I'd had enough. Enough of Marcus's taunts, Celeste's scornful looks, the constant feeling of being belittled. I shot to my feet, my voice trembling with rage. "You think I'm nothing, don't you?" The room fell silent. "You think I'm just a failure with a rotting cottage? Well, I have something neither of you will ever have." I paused, my heart pounding, knowing I was going too far but unable to stop. I found a scroll in the cottage. A scroll pointing to gemstone deposits, oil, and precious timber worth over 500 million. You hear me? 500 million. The crowded room went deathly quiet, the air so thick I could hear my own heartbeat. Dozens of eyes turned to me, but they all blurred. Only Marcus and Celeste stood out. Marcus's face paled for a moment, then twisted into a greedy smile. His eyes gleamed with suspicion and excitement as if he'd already touched the gold. "Jasper," Marcus said, his voice shaky but eager, "are you serious, or did you just lose it and blurt that out?" Celeste was different. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, a mocking smirk on her lips. "Oh, come on, Jasper. Another one of your attention-grabbing stunts? A treasure? Sounds like something out of a children's book." I didn't respond. My throat tightened, but my feet moved. I turned and left the bakery in silence, ignoring the murmurs rising behind me. I had just revealed the biggest secret of my life, and I knew from this moment there was no going back. Marcus, with his insatiable greed, would surely pursue it to the end. Celeste, with her cold pretense, would find a way to exploit it to the fullest. The door swung open. I stepped outside. The biting heat stung my skin, and dust fell heavily on the road, as weighty as the gaze of Mother Earth. Everything seemed to be watching, waiting to see which path I would choose next. Just a few days after the memorial, the real storm began. Marcus didn't waste any time. The morning after, as I sat in my small apartment trying to sort through my chaotic thoughts, a letter was slipped under the door. I opened it, and the cold words of a law firm hit me like a slap. Marcus had filed a lawsuit against me, accusing me of concealing family inheritance assets. The legal claim stated that the treasure scroll, the one I found in the cottage, was part of the Thorne family legacy, and that I, Jasper, was intentionally trying to keep it for myself. I read it over and over, my heart pounding, not from fear, but from a rage that flared like wildfire. My brother, the one who once held my hand as a child, who giggled when I fixed his bicycle, was now dragging me to court, as if we had never been family. But Marcus didn't stop at lawsuits. He was busy spreading rumors like a toxic wind sweeping through Darwin. I heard from Aunt Clara that Marcus had been going around from high society parties to family gatherings, telling anyone who would listen that I was a selfish man hiding a $500 million treasure, the legacy of the entire Thorne clan. "Jasper thinks he can keep it all to himself," he'd say, his voice dripping with feigned indignation as if he were the one betrayed. "He's not thinking of the family, not thinking of Mom and Dad." His words spread like fire through a dry bush, and soon it seemed the entire city had heard about Jasper's treasure. Distant relatives began to circle like vultures smelling blood. Uncle Robert, a man I'd only met a handful of times in my life, called me one evening, his voice as sweet as honey. "Jasper, how you holding up? Heard you found something pretty interesting in your parents' cottage, huh?" he asked as if we were old pals. "Family's got to stick together, Jasper. If there's something valuable, you should share it with everyone. Right? Don't let people think you're selfish." I gripped the phone, trying to keep my voice steady. "Uncle, I'm not keeping anything. It's just a scroll, and I haven't done anything with it." But Robert wouldn't let up. He laughed loudly as if I had just told a joke. "Don't play coy with me, Jasper. If you don't share, people won't be happy. You don't want the whole clan turning their backs on you, do you?" His threat cut like a knife, but it wasn't the only one. Others, distant relatives, old friends, even people I'd never met, started reaching out. A far-off cousin texted me suggesting I share the scroll's information for resource extraction, promising to split the profits. An old neighbor stopped by the bakery, clapped me on the shoulder, and said, "Jasper, do the right thing. Don't let people think you're greedy." I looked at them, faces that were once familiar, now twisted by greed. I wanted to scream that I wasn't planning to take anything, that I just wanted to honor my parents' wishes to protect Mother Earth. But I knew they wouldn't understand. To them, I was no longer Jasper, the man raised in the bush who respected the land and sky. I was just the guy holding a treasure they wanted a piece of. The tabloid media jumped in like sharks smelling blood. One morning, as I opened the local paper, a sensational headline screamed, "Outback Man Hoards $500 million Family Treasure." The article was riddled with fabrications, calling me a selfish son and a disloyal heir, trying to steal the legacy from my brother and family. Reporters began loitering outside the bakery, cameras flashing every time I stepped out. "Jasper, what can you tell us about the treasure scroll?" one shouted, thrusting a microphone in my face. "What are you going to do with $500 million?" I didn't answer, just kept my head down and pushed past them. But it felt like I was being hunted. Every step I took, I could feel the city's eyes on me as if I were a criminal. Worse still, the cottage in the Northern Territory, the place where I grew up, where memories of my parents lived, became the center of morbid curiosity. A friend from the plains called to warn me that locals had started showing up, lurking around the property, some even sneaking in to search for the treasure. I drove there the next day, and the sight before me broke my heart. The stone fence was torn down, windows smashed, the yard littered with haphazardly dug holes. The cottage, though already dilapidated, had been sacred to me. Now it was violated, as if Mother Earth herself had been insulted. I stood in the yard, dust falling silently, and it felt like the land was weeping with me. Celeste, of course, didn't stay out of it. One evening, she appeared at my apartment door wearing an expensive designer dress, her eyes soft like they used to be. "Jasper," she said, her voice so sweet it sent chills down my spine. "I'm sorry for what happened. I was wrong. You're not a failure. You have that scroll. We could do something big together." I looked at her, feeling like I was staring at a stranger. She hadn't come back because she loved me or because she understood me. She came back for the $500 million, for the glamour she thought I could now provide. "Get out," I said, my voice cold as ice. "I don't need you, and I don't need your lies." Celeste froze, her lips tightening, but then she turned and walked away, leaving me with a heavy loneliness. I was cornered like a beast surrounded by wolves. Alone, I had to face Marcus's greed, Celeste's deceit, and the relentless scrutiny and harassment from relatives, acquaintances, and the media. Each day, the pressure grew heavier, like an unending sandstorm. I began to wonder if I was wrong, if I should just give up the scroll, share it with everyone, and live the big life they wanted. But every time that thought crossed my mind, I heard my father's voice. "The land is our mother, and you must protect her." I clutched the scroll hidden in the drawer and told myself I wouldn't betray my parents' legacy, no matter the cost. The tension escalated to a breaking point, and I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff with no way out. But I didn't know that just when everything seemed lost, a greater truth was waiting, ready to reveal the final answer. Chapter 3. The True Inheritance. 2 months later, the inheritance dispute between my brother and me officially began. That day, the Darwin sky was cloaked in heavy gray, as if nature itself was growling at the storm about to erupt. I stepped into the courtroom, my heart aching, feeling like a trapped animal surrounded by the cold stares of lawyers, the sternness of the judge, and the curious gazes of strangers there to watch the drama unfold. Marcus sat across from me, his eyes sharp and cold, the corner of his mouth curling into a confident smirk, as if victory was already in his grasp. Beside him, Celeste was dressed in a dazzling gown, but her eyes avoided mine, the man she once called her love. I clenched my rough hands inside my father's old jacket, my breath heavy as I tried to stay calm. Deep down, I wanted to scream that I didn't care about money, that all I wanted was to protect my parents' legacy. But I knew in this room, no one truly cared. The judge, a middle-aged man with a deep, stern voice, banged his gavel to start the proceedings. Marcus's lawyer stood, his voice sharp and accusing, alleging that I had hidden the scroll, a shared asset of the Thorne family, and demanded that the court force me to surrender it for equal division. Jasper Thorne has deliberately tried to monopolize an inheritance worth $500 million, he declared. He has not only betrayed his brother, but also the family and the values his parents left behind. His words were like daggers, slicing deep into my pride. I wanted to stand up to say that I never intended to keep anything for myself, that I only wanted to preserve Mother Earth. But my lawyer, a court-appointed one, told me to stay quiet, that he would handle the rest. I looked at Marcus and saw him smiling, that same triumphant grin from the day Barnaby read the will. Celeste held his hand, her eyes sparkling with pride, but I knew it wasn't for Marcus. It was for the $1 million penthouse and the glamour she thought he brought. I bowed my head, trying to focus on my father's words. True value lies not in what you take, but in what you keep. But in this room, surrounded by greedy stares and accusations, I felt like I was losing, as if everything I believed in was meaningless. Then, just as the judge was about to ask me his first question, the courtroom door swung open. A cold gust of wind rushed in, accompanied by murmurs from those present. I looked up and my heart stopped. Standing in the doorway with a familiarity that hurt were my parents, Roderick Thorne and Eleanor Thorne. My father, tall and lean with his black hair tied back and eyes sharp as a hawk. My mother, gentle with her auburn hair and warm smile, though her eyes now carried a hint of sternness. The courtroom was stunned, gasps turning to shocked whispers before falling silent as my father stepped forward, his deep voice resonating through the room. We're not dead, and we have something to say. I sat there, unable to believe my eyes. Marcus jumped up, his face pale, mouth agape as if he'd seen a ghost. Celeste gripped his hand tightly, her eyes filled with panic as if she knew everything was about to collapse. The judge banged his gavel, calling for order, but even he couldn't hide his astonishment. "Mr. and Mrs. Thorne," he said, his voice slightly trembling. "Please explain." My father stepped up to the stand, my mother beside him, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. "Everything you've seen, the helicopter crash, the will, the scroll, was a test." My father began, his voice steady like when he taught me about Mother Earth. "We wanted to see which of our 2 sons was worthy of inheriting our ancestors' legacy. Not money, not land, but the values we've spent our lives protecting." He looked at me, then at Marcus, his gaze sharp, but not judgmental. "We faked our disappearance to see what you would do when faced with temptation." The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. My head spun as if the ground beneath me was shaking. Marcus shook his head, stammering. "Dad, Mom, what kind of joke is this? I inherited the penthouse, the assets. The lawyer said so." Barnaby, who had been sitting in the corner, stood up, his voice calm but clear. "That will was fake, Marcus," he said. "At your parents' request, I presented a fabricated will to test you and your brother. The glass-fronted penthouse in Sydney, the liquid assets, they all still belong to Mr. and Mrs. Thorne." Marcus was stunned, as if he'd been slapped. Celeste let go of his hand, her eyes frantic, darting from Marcus to me, then to my parents. I sat there, my heart pounding, not from joy, but from realization. My father continued, his voice low but powerful. "The scroll Jasper found was also fake. Another test. The symbols and information on it were entirely fabricated. If Jasper had let greed cloud his judgment, if he had tried to sell those secrets, he would have gained nothing and lost everything. But Jasper chose to stay silent, to keep the secret and honor Mother Earth, just as I taught him." He looked at Marcus, his eyes sad but not angry. "But you, Marcus, you let greed guide you. You sued your brother, spread rumors, and treated money as everything. You are not worthy of the Thorne name." Marcus bowed his head, unable to speak. Celeste, pale as a ghost, stood up and stepped toward me. "Jasper," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I was wrong. I shouldn't have left you. We can start over, right?" I looked at her, her eyes now pleading, but all I saw was deceit. "No, Celeste," I said, my voice cold as ice. "You chose Marcus for money, and now you're coming back for money. I don't need you." Celeste stood there, humiliated, then burst into tears like a child. Meanwhile, the judge, still in shock, declared the lawsuit dismissed. My parents approached me and my mother hugged me tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You did the right thing, Jasper," she whispered. "You're the son we've always been proud of." Marcus, now empty-handed, fell to his knees before our parents in the courtroom. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice choked with sobs. "I was wrong. Please give me a chance." My father looked at him, his gaze stern but not unforgiving. "You'll have a chance, Marcus," he said, "but you must prove yourself worthy. Live a year in the bush as I did, and learn to respect Mother Earth. If you can do that, you'll have what you deserve." Marcus nodded, tears streaming down his face, and I saw in him a glimpse of the little boy who used to hold my hand years ago. That evening, in the old stone cottage in the plains, where memories of my childhood still lingered in every weathered stone, I sat with my parents for the first time since those agonizing months when I thought I'd lost them forever. The firelight from the old hearth danced, casting flickering shadows on the walls. My father, with the rugged presence of a bushman, sat in an old wooden chair, his hands clasped tightly, his sharp eyes softened with affection as he looked at me. My mother, her auburn hair now streaked with silver, sat beside me, her gentle hand resting on mine, warm as it was when she used to stroke my hair as a child. They told me their story, a story of survival, of love, and of unwavering faith in me. "After the helicopter crash," my father began, his voice deep like the wind rustling through the gum trees, "we were stranded in the vast outback with no phone, no signal, no hope. But I learned from your grandfather, from the bushmen before him, that Mother Earth never abandons her children if they know how to listen." He spoke of the long days and the blistering heat, how he built fires from the smallest dry twigs, hunted kangaroos to feed my mother, and constructed a shelter from rocks and stones to withstand the storms. "With every step, I thought of you and Marcus," he said, his eyes softening. "I told myself that if we survived, I had to do something to make you understand. Understand that true value lies not in what you have, but in who you are." My mother squeezed my hand tighter, her eyes glistening with tears, but her smile still warm as the rare outback rain. "Jasper, you are our pride," she said, her voice choked with emotion but filled with love. "When you were young, I watched you chop firewood, waded into rivers to catch fish, and I knew you were stronger than anyone. Not because you were taller or stronger, but because you had the heart of Mother Earth. Honest, resilient, and never betraying what your father taught you." She paused, wiping a tear from her cheek. "When we decided to fake our deaths, I was terrified. Terrified that you'd hurt, that you'd think we'd abandoned you. But I believed in you. Believed that you wouldn't let greed guide you, that you'd hold on to our family's legacy." I sat there in the familiar stone cottage, feeling as if I were back in those nights by the fire when my father told stories of our bushman ancestors, when my mother sang me lullabies through dust storms. Their words were like a flame warming my heart, thawing the chill of those lonely months. "We wanted to see who you were when we were gone," my mother continued, her eyes locking onto mine as if to etch every word into my soul. "And you, Jasper, gave us the answer. You didn't choose money, didn't choose glory. You chose Mother Earth, chose what we taught you. You are the son we've always been proud of." My father stood and walked to the hearth where the firelight illuminated his face, highlighting its weathered but compassionate lines. He pulled a small wooden box from his coat pocket, intricately carved with bushman patterns, a gift I recognized from my grandfather to him. "This is the real scroll," he said, handing it to me. "You have full authority over this scroll. To exploit it or preserve it, the choice is yours. But I trust you'll do the right thing, as you always have." I took the box, my hands trembling, feeling as if I were holding the entire legacy of our ancestors. I opened it and found a different scroll, drawn on animal hide, its lines meticulously detailed. It wasn't just a scroll, it was a promise, a responsibility, the soul of Mother Earth. I looked at my parents, tears streaming down my face, not from sorrow but from the realization that they had never abandoned me. "I'll keep it," I said, my voice hoarse. "I'll protect it as you have, as our ancestors have." My mother came closer, hugging me tightly as she did when I was a child. My father placed his hand on my shoulder, his gaze steadfast but filled with love. And now, in the old stone cottage, amid the crackling fire and the warm voices of my parents, I suddenly understood. True value doesn't lie in money, in penthouses, or in treasures. It lies in character, in how we protect our legacy, in how we live true to our beliefs. I gripped the real scroll tightly, knowing with certainty that I would never exploit it. I would preserve it as my parents had, as our ancestors had, so that Mother Earth would remain Mother Earth forever.